Morning, friends. Good morning, friends. Welcome to Community Church of Boston. We're so glad you are with us in this time that we need each other and we need to understand our interdependence more than ever before. Light this candle for unity, for strength, and for hope. If I stood out in the rain night, my only light a candle 1,000,000 miles away, would you lay down your fire as I raised mine? Would you not kill again? And oh, when you're near me, oh my love, oh my joy, there's nothing ever to weary me, oh my darling one. I love that song by Cindy Callett. It puts together our sense of outrage with the reason for the outrage, which is love, that we love each other and love our community and love our planet. And we want to save it and preserve it. So welcome. We have a full, not only a full program this morning, but a full day. I'll tell you more about it. I first want to just welcome back with us Rod McDonald. I've known Rod's music for a long time. He's just a beautiful fixture in the folk scene all the way back to the 80s in Greenwich Village. Still an active member of the Greenwich Folk Music Festival and that scene. Now lives in Florida. And we're always so glad to hear Rod's beautiful voice and Rod's many beautiful songs that contribute to our community and to our movement. Rod, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. Let me see. I hope I'm unmuted. There we are. Well, I think I'm just going to get warmed up here with a little song, love song for the American voter here. Joe Public smokes 2 packs a day, drives home from work on the interstate highway. After drinking 3 beers, cell phone in hand, he's doing 80 in his oversized van. But Joe's not afraid of dying from tobacco or drinking or even his driving. Got the radio on, the reception is clear. He's hearing all the things he should fear. Joe Public is afraid of Al-Qaeda. They're coming to get him. Sooner or later, Joe Public is afraid of terror. It keeps getting closer in the rearview mirror. And all those illegals crossing the border, crawling through the desert, coming for his daughter. Joe Public's got a lot on his mind. Joe Public makes $35,000. Has 2 kids in high school trying for college. He walks in the door and their music is playing. He can't understand a thing that it's saying. But Joe's not afraid that his kids will find the handgun where he keeps it hid. Joe's afraid of the United Nations, gun laws, gay rights, and peace demonstrations. He went through the duct tape and plastic in case the real enemy does something drastic, like mailing him anthrax and causing a panic, or requiring everyone to learn to speak Spanish. Joe's ready for freedom to happen when the government comes to take away his weapon. Joe Public's got a lot on his mind. Joe Public got asthma at 40. His health insurance costs more than his mortgage. The state stopped testing cars for emissions. Joe Public's glad cause he would have had to fix his. But Joe's not afraid of pollution. Thinks less regulation is the only solution. And don't get him started on health care. He says everyone knows it's a socialist nightmare. He's down with the troops, he supports every mission that'll keep his gas under $4 a gallon. But why do they hate us? He can't understand. Well, we never ever did nothing to them. Joe can't wait for the next election to re-elect the guy who took away his pension. Joe Public's got a lot on his mind. Well, good morning, everybody. Hope that was at least enough to get people waking up here.
That woke us up. Thank you, Rod. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I want to just make two announcements to start out with. This Thursday is November 14th, and there's a remarkable event that was going to be here, but they realized this was too small a venue. It's a celebration of the release of two books. One is by the two directors of Jewish Voice for Peace, Rebecca Vilkomerson and Alyssa Wise. And it's a book that's called Solidarity is the Political Version of Love, Lessons from Jewish Anti-Zionist Organizing. The other book is one I have a copy of right here with me. It's called Visualizing Palestine, A Chronicle of Colonialism and the Struggle for Liberation. It's a remarkable book. It's all these wonderful graphic designers putting together graphics about the situation in the Middle East, specifically Palestine, Israel. I open it to a random page, and this one talks about Inequity Offline, Community Rohingya. From August 2017 to January 2018, 688,000 Rohingya fled Myanmar due to an escalation of state violence in what has been a decades-long genocide. Censorship online. In September 2017, multiple Rohingya activists reported seeing their posts removed or accounts blocked from Facebook after sharing information about attacks on the Rohingya. If you look on Dean Stevens' Facebook page, you'll see two posts that I just put up about Meta censoring Palestine posts, which I know for sure happens. If I put up photos of mom or puppies or bunnies, there's 300 likes immediately. A post about let's say Hillel concert in Boston that happened last week. That was musicians from settlements in the West Bank and protests against that. There's not a single like or reaction. Go figure. And these articles talk about the long association between Facebook, Meta, and Israel, and that there are even Israeli elements in high leadership just deciding on how to change the algorithm so that stuff doesn't get disseminated. It's very different and unusual. Next, I'll tell you about next Sunday. Steve Kellerman is a longtime member of Community Church, and we pride in the fact that a lot of our members participate and do programs. Steve has done several in the past. He's a retired machinist and also a longtime activist in the labor union movement, longtime Wobbly, IWW. And this program, and also a magnificent historian himself, this program is called Benito Mussolini, the Dictator and the Revolutionary Socialist. Sound germane to this moment, folks? Steve Kellerman, next Sunday. Join us if you can. I will tell you about the rest of the very busy day we have today. We start with our regular morning meeting with Rod McDonald and Professor Richard Wolff. 12:30, we have a beautiful luncheon by Luis Guzman, our cook and janitor, preparation for a 1:30 meeting of the congregation, members meeting to vote, hopefully unanimously, to empower our board to sign a lease for a new restaurant which will come in on the first floor. We are not ready to announce it because there's two options, two leases all ready to sign, and we just have to decide, and there's still a little bit of negotiation which will maybe tip the scales in one direction or the other. So that meeting for members, either online or physically, is at 1:30. Now I backtrack to 12:30, where in our vacant first floor space, Medea Benjamin will be doing a hands-on seminar or training on direct action. 12:30, Medea Benjamin. And then after our congregational meeting, Medea will give a talk up here at 3 p.m. That's a lot for one day for any one member, but join us online or physically for any of those events. There's also, as if you hadn't heard enough, in the evening, Elizabeth Murray will give an online talk for our regular John F. Kennedy speech celebration, remembering John F. Kennedy's June 10th, 1963 speech at American University, which we memorialize, and we have tried to do every 10th of the month an online speaker talking about peace. I don't know much about Elizabeth Murray, but you look on our website or Facebook page and you can find out more. And that's at 7 p.m., so join us for that. And as if that weren't enough, I have, before we go on, three quotes that I found recently. This one is from a wonderful organization that I love and have supported for years and years. It's called the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas. They work on developing perennial agriculture that doesn't chop up the soil every year and send a good percentage of it down the Mississippi River. Land Institute. And here's an old English quatrain. The law locks up both man and woman who steal the goose from off the common, but lets the greater felon loose who steals the common from the goose. There's a whole bunch more that I won't read right now. And here's something my friend Roberta Valenti sent me, quote, on her refrigerator for years. This will be our reply to violence, to make music more intensely, more beautifully, more devotedly than ever before. And you can take out the word violence and add the word fascism or repression, whatever you want. And that quote's from Leonard Bernstein. And finally, this came from the archives. Every time I go to the 5th floor, and we don't have the bandwidth to really devote to really take care of that archive like we should, but it sits up there waiting for lots of human hours and waiting for a PhD candidate to write a book about it, or maybe it's just 104 years of the beautiful history of this place doing good trouble in the city of Boston. But this was a little songbook from an event that they did that had a song that I loved. I remember it from my evangelical childhood, and here it's been changed quite a bit. And I won't do the whole song, I'll just do a couple verses. What a friend we have in Jesus. What a friend in Socrates. What a friend we have in Buddha. To the kingdom we have keys. We believe in many saviors. We believe in many seers. Souls whose universal gospel speaks to us across the years. What a friend we have in Moses. What a friend in Esther too. We have Lao Tse and Confucius, and a prophet lives in you. When you're weak and heavy laden, cumbered with a heavy care, think of friends throughout the ages, every when and everywhere. I love that. It's just a different take on that little children's Sunday school hymn. We have Rod McDonald back for a couple of numbers. Welcome, Rod McDonald.
Thank you, Dean. I was working on a new song this week, and I think I'll play it for you folks, sing it for you folks. And you know, Dean, what you just said was the perfect introduction. I think that this song is really in reference to stealing the common from the goose. So let's see if we can do it here. You give me $1 million, we'll forget about climate change. I'll let you drill wherever you want, in the parks or on the range. You give me $5 million, we'll forget about weapons bans. I'll tell my guys in the next Congress to reject them out of hand. Now you give me 20 million voters, I'll give you the Supreme Court. We'll fill the branch with kids who love us and never practiced law before. You give me $10 billion, I'll put the Ukraine into play. You'll still have to go in and take it, but I'll look the other way. Let's make a deal, you and me. We're taking charge of this country. We'll tell the working men and women how great he's gonna be. That's as far as they're concerned, brother, don't you see? If you want me to get elected, let's make a deal, you and me. Hey, you give me some inside info, I'll get the weapons on the move. Some dirt on my opponent gets you what Congress has approved. You'll find me 12,000 votes, throw your electors over to me. And no one else will ever run against you or threaten your family. Hey, you give me $50 million, and if I win the race, you'll get all the federal contracts and be in charge of space. You put your newspapers endorsing my opponent to a stop. I'll tell my Justice Department not to break your business up. Let's make a deal, you and me. We'll take charge of this country. We'll tell the working men and women how great they're gonna be. Far as they're concerned, but brother, don't you see? If you want me to get elected, let's make a deal, you and me. Hey, that's as far as they're concerned, but brother, don't you see? If you want me to get you results, let's make a deal, you and me. All right. Give me a second here. I was driving down the road one day about a little more than 10 years ago now, and was just listening to the news. I was struck by a particular aspect of the alienation of people that were, out there working for a living. And I was on my way to a folk festival at the time in Florida here, and started writing this song, one of those things you do when you're driving and you're on a 4-lane highway with traffic lights. Is every time the light stops, you grab your pen and you write another couple of lines down as they're coming to you. And got to the festival and drove into the site, and I was just driving around looking for a place to park, and a guy walked over to me and he said, "Hey, Rod, park with us. Come on over here. We'll feed you." So I parked my car and went over and sat down on a picnic table with these folks and just wrote this song right in front of them, sang it on the main stage. And I thought at the time that maybe it would be gone after a while, but recently I was playing somewhere and I got a whole lot of requests for it. And one of them said to me, "That song's not going away anytime soon." So maybe they're right. Well, he was born in a land of plenty, served his country overseas, worked hard to raise his family and have some security. He was looking forward to retirement, a little condo somewhere in the sun. Now they say we just can't afford him, 'cause all of the money is gone. He's the last American worker, and they've got him dead in their sights. They're taking away everything that he worked for. Somebody turn out the lights. He invested his savings on Wall Street. Now they're worth 2 cents on the dime. The boys who lost all his money got a bonus and a bailout at the same time. His house, it's worth less than his mortgage, and he can't make the payments anymore. And the bank is talking foreclosure since they shipped his job off to Bangalore. He's the last American worker, and they've got him dead in their sights. They're taking away everything that he worked for. Somebody turn out the lights. Well, he used to go and see a doctor before his waistline got thick. Now his insurance costs half his income, still won't cover him when he gets sick. And they passed a national health program for all of the people to share. Now they say we just can't afford it, so they can give a tax cut to all the billionaires. Hey, it's the last American worker, and they've got him dead in their sights. They're taking away everything that he worked for. Somebody turn out the lights. Now the governor had a vision of the future. All the children in public schools were staring at the same on-screen teacher, broadcasting from Bombay, Wolff, and Jewel. They all memorize the same test answers. They grow up a nation of fools and re-elect the same politicians who send their own kids off to private schools. He's the last American worker, and they've got him dead in their sights. They're taking away everything that he worked for. Somebody turn out the lights. He still votes in every election for God-fearing candidates, each and every one. They tell him they're gonna end abortion, and they're never gonna take away his gun. and they go off to Washington or Tallahassee and play the corporate millionaires game. Send his kids off to war till there's no money anymore, and then they tell him he's the one to blame. He's the last American worker, and they've got him dead in their sights. They're taking away everything that he worked for. Somebody turn out the lights. He's the last American worker, and they've got him dead in their sights. They're taking away everything that he works for. Somebody turn out the lights. Yeah, they're taking away everything that he works for. Somebody turn out the lights.
Rod McDonald. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's amazing, just song after song after song from Rod. I was telling Rod we really hope we can host you for a full concert here at the church when you're physically in New England someplace. Let us know. We'll drop everything and host you. Hey, I wanted to share with you a pile of cassettes that I have here. I ran into this outfit that's it was recommended to me, called Legacy Box, that does kind of massive digitization. We happen to have 40 years of recordings of speakers in our archives, and we are about to send these off to get digitized. We've been doing them like one at a time. It's tedious, and you know, we've done like W.B. Du Bois and a couple of Howard Zinns and what else have we done? Cesar Chavez, and anyway, I just wanted to read you these names. Dan Berrigan, Phil Berrigan, Roger Wilkins, Ossie Davis, Paul Robeson, Jr., that is, not the Paul Robeson. Philip Zwirling, who was our minister, several Noam Chomskys. There's Benjamin Hooks, and there's Jonathan Kozol. And so I just wanted to share that with you. So I'll put these back. Maybe I'll just leave them here till afterwards. Put them back later. I also want to tell you about what happened this weekend. Last night we had the Peña. Every second Saturday of the month, it's a Latin American style open mic with lots of great food and delicious poetry, and anyone who comes can participate. Doesn't have to be from Latin America. They also this year put together a really beautiful display of Dia de los Muertos in the first floor restaurant. Check it out when you leave. It is a really lovely tribute to our fallen departed. There's a picture of my mom down there and lots of others. There's a picture of Che and Hugo Chavez and on and on. So that happened last night. Friday night we had maybe 75 Berklee College of Music students in here. They are all students of Francisco Mela, who is a very famous major dude in the world of percussion, played with McCoy Tyner and Quincy Jones, and he teaches at Berklee, and has all these students, and this was free jazz, and it was wild. It reminded me of a bumper sticker I saw, which should be the title of the concert. It still isn't weird enough for me. That was Friday night, and I'm sure we'll do more of that music. We have just been having all kinds of great events here, and we welcome you to participate in see our schedule. And we also had lots of meetings, organizing meetings: Extinction Rebellion, Democratic Socialists of America, Palestine Working Group, Muslims for Progressive Values. The list goes on. We are a meeting space here, comfortable, lovely place for radical organizations to organize. Richard Wolff is our speaker this morning, and we are so glad to have him back. Rick, thank you so much for gracing our pulpit, our stage, whatever you want to call it, several times now. Richard Wolff is Professor Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, founder of Democracy at Work, host of the weekly podcast available on radio, TV, and YouTube that's called Economic Update, and author of numerous works. His latest book, Understanding Capitalism, is available on the website DemocracyAtWork.info. Thank you, Rick Wolff.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you. I want to begin by recognizing Rob. I thought the music that I was privileged to listen to this morning reminded me of Bob Dylan and Woody Guthrie and all that they represent. And I thought he captured the mood and he captured the spirit of what they had tried to do and what for many of us they did. I want to get into the talk I have for you today, but I want to begin by reminding you of a famous saying. It goes like this: please don't shoot the messenger just because you don't like the message. I am not responsible for the conditions that we face as a nation today, but I am not going to sugarcoat what the situation is. My guess is you already know it in your hearts and in the backs of your minds, if not in the front. And if you had any doubt, the last week's election results probably removed them. So I thought it might be useful if we took stock of where we are here on the 10th of November, 2024. And by taking stock, I mean economics above all else. I do that because I think that's a core part of our situation about which Americans are extraordinarily poorly informed. I also do it because it's what I do for a living and it's what I study. And I feel an obligation, morally, ethically, to share with you what is going on, to make sure that however difficult it may be to face it, we will, because that's our best chance to work out of it and to get beyond it, which surely we need to do. Okay, let me get into it then, and I'll try to make it as brief as such a task could possibly be. I do believe we are at a major transition point in the history of the United States and probably of the whole world. I know that sounds grandiose, and I don't normally talk in grandiose terms, but the situation calls for it. And as I say, I'm not going to shrink away from why I think this. So let me begin by telling you why I think it's such an important moment in our history. For most of the last 50 years, roughly since 1970, the dominant economic reality of the global economy and of the United States as the major player and shaper of that global economy in the last 50 years, that period can be characterized by many names, but the one that economists use is the phrase neoliberal globalization. And here's what it means: that in an era that we remember with names like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, we turned away from the legacy of the New Deal. We turned away, as did many other countries, from the notion that a catastrophe like the Great Depression of the 1930s required that government play a major role in keeping capitalism tolerable for the mass of people. Remember what we did in the 1930s. We established Social Security that had never existed before in the United States. We established a minimum wage that had never existed before in the United States. We established unemployment insurance that had never existed before in the United States. And the government hired and paid 15 million people who were unemployed, and nothing like that had ever happened in the United States either. The government was called in to do all these things, in the words of one clever thinker, to give capitalism a human face. And it was paid for because it was very expensive, as you can imagine. To give every elderly American a Social Security check every month for the rest of their lives. To give unemployed people a check every week for a year or two. To hire 15 million people. And the money that paid for all of that were heavy taxes placed on corporations and the rich. It's an important reminder for those of you who do not think that here in the United States we can ever tax corporations and the rich. It's an important reminder, of course we can, because we already did. As the remembrance, and footnote, the politician who had the courage to tax corporations and the rich, Franklin Roosevelt, was reelected president 3 consecutive times. He has been and is to this moment the most successful popular president in the history of the United States, starting with George Washington. So not only can you tax corporations and the rich, but when we had a president who was forced from below to do it, he became the most popular politician we've ever had. In the period starting in 1970, as the memory of the New Deal, as it was called, faded, Reagan and Thatcher undertook to roll the New Deal back. It had already begun before that, but it really gathered steam. And the mantra was the reverse of the New Deal. Instead of calling the government in to give capitalism a human face, people stumbled over one another, led by the Republicans, but tragically followed by the Democrats, to roll the government back, to get the government out of the economy, to go back to a capitalism which, if I may be allowed to continue the metaphor, lacks a human face, as the songs we just heard today document. And over the last 50 years, the government not only didn't regulate the way it once did, didn't intervene the way it once did, but it blessed the decision of corporate America to go where the profits were the greatest, which is what capitalism normally does. And where were profits the greatest? Answer: China. Starting in the 1970s, we had a mammoth exodus, and not like the one in the Bible. No, this was an exodus of American corporate leaders. They had graduated from business school where they had been taught, parentheses, I have taught in business schools myself, I know the curriculum. They were taught, if you want to succeed in business, go to where the wages are low and the market is expanding. The place where the wages were low and the market was expanding the most was in the land called the People's Republic of China. And American corporations, British and French and German and Italian and Japanese, they all went to China, where they were welcomed, where they were celebrated. And over the last 40 to 50 years, the Chinese economy grew. About half the economy there is capitalist. Private companies working pretty much the way they do here. The other half of the Chinese economy is government-owned and operated enterprises working the way they once did in places like the Soviet Union. China is a hybrid between the US and the Soviet Union, different from both because it's a mixed situation. And it turns out that under the leadership of the Chinese Mao Zedong and the ones that have come since him, it turns out this hybrid organization can grow faster than any other economic system the world has ever seen. For the last 30 years, China has grown its economy, its GDP, its gross domestic product, between 6 and 9% per year. During that time, the United States GDP grew between 2 and 3% a year. It doesn't take rocket science to understand that if you can manage that difference, if China can grow 2 to 3 times faster than the United States for 30 years, it can do what it has now done. Namely, it's caught up. Today, the United States has a competitor economically. We haven't had one for a century. World War II eliminated the potential competitors economically of the United States. Britain, France, Italy, Germany, and Japan, all destroyed in and by that war. Russia too. Russia never was an economic competitor. It isn't now either. The GDP of the United States right now is about $25 trillion. The GDP of Russia about now is 3, maybe 4 trillion. No contest. It never was. It's part of why the entire Cold War will have to be revisited so Americans can finally learn what the truth about all of this is. Well, here we are. And what has happened has been that the United States now faces, for the first time in a century, an economic competitor. Big, powerful, highly developed, and able to outcompete the United States across the board, from the lowest to the highest technology which either side is capable of. And the United States has not yet come to terms with this situation. The American people are engaged in what my psychotherapist wife explains to me is called denial. The pretense, mostly to yourself, that the reality around you isn't there. It's best understood when glimpsing a toddler confronted by a scary barking dog, and the toddler puts his or her hands in front of her eyes, comforted by the thought that if you can't see the dog, it isn't there. But we all know you grow up, and at a certain point, not many years later, you come to understand you can put your hand there, but it doesn't make the dog disappear. China's going nowhere. China is growing. By the way, lest you think any of this is in the past, let me give you right now what the rate of growth of economic output is for 2024, this year. These I'm about to give you are the estimates of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which monitors all of this. Economic growth for the United States, 2024, will be 2.8%, right on target with what it's been on and off for a long time. The economic growth of People's Republic of China this year will be 4.8%, nearly double. And the economic growth of India will be 7%. The next time you hear an American politician or you read in an American newspaper how the American economy is doing better than anyone in the world, please remember the word denial. That kind of statement, which I encounter almost every day, is the exact equivalent of a toddler putting fingers in front of her eyes or nose in hoping that the scary dog will go away. Not only have the Chinese outgrown us, but they have built an alliance with other countries that are recognizing that what was true for the last 75 years, a global economy dominated by the United States as the country that came out of World War II with no bombs that fell on it other than Pearl Harbor, and less damage than any other developed country. The Chinese have built an alliance called the BRICS, B-R-I-C-S. You don't hear as much about it as you ought to. It started a few years ago, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, 5 countries. A year and a half ago, 6 more joined. And 3 weeks ago, 13 more joined. The BRICS together is more than half the population of this planet. The United States is 4.5%, not 50% of this planet. The total output of goods and services in the BRICS is significantly larger already than the total output of the United States and its major allies, known as the G7. The United States, Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. So now every country in the world, every company in the world is reassessing and redesigning its strategy for the future. And what do I mean? They're redesigning because the dominant player in the world of the last 70 years, the United States, isn't the dominant player anymore. There is a bigger player, richer player in the BRICS, which means if you're going to build a railroad in your country, you don't just go to Washington or London or Paris. You may go to them, but you're going to ask them what offer they can make, and then you're going to compare it to what you can get from Beijing, New Delhi, and Sao Paulo. And in case after case, the choice is made to go with the BRICS, not the West. So what do I mean? I mean to tell you all that if you asked me to tell you what is the biggest reality we now have to face, it's the end of the American empire. What we inherited from the British, because they had the last empire before this one, is now over, and there is zero chance it's coming back. It ought to have been a central issue in the presidential election we just had. Instead, the two candidates and their parties worked overtime to practice denial. No such a thing. The war in Ukraine, just to take one of countless examples, will show you how costly this denial is. When the war begins in February of 2022, President Biden told us, along with all of his officials, Russia would be brought to its knees. The Russian currency, the ruble, would collapse. The entire West would side with Ukraine against the Russian invasion and would defeat the Russians. None of that happened. Every part of that prediction proved false. Why? Because the way Russia was to be brought to its knees was by denying the market for Russian oil and gas, whose export the Russians depend on. It's a major industry for them. And they exported all of that energy to Western Europe. When the Western Europeans, under pressure from the United States, closed their markets to Russia, the expectation was that Russia would collapse. Instead, Russia went to its allies in the BRICS, above all China and India, and arranged to sell to them the oil and gas they no longer sold to the Europeans. As a result, Russia is growing faster this year than the United States, and it has grown at a faster rate than the United States throughout the war. You couldn't be more mistaken than this. That's what it means if you deny a reality. All right, let me tell you the next step of this because it drives home the point. What we know about the history of every other empire that also grew was powerful and then died was that the ride up as you're growing is a lot more fun and pleasant than the ride down when you're dying. The ride up was the 20th century, which many of you, like me, lived through. We now have to figure out how we descend when our empire is dying. What the United States is doing is typical. Denial has always been there. You can travel to Britain today and encounter no small number of people who still imagine that the British Empire is still there. Witness the inauguration ceremonies for King Charles, who's the king of nobody. What is this? Here's how it works in the United States. People who are rich and powerful are offloading the costs of a declining empire off of themselves. They don't want to suffer, which I understand. But if the economy is going down, which it is, and the people at the top are keeping theirs, which they are, then the rest of us, the middle class, the lower classes, the poor, we're going to be taking it on the chin more and more. And let me give you just a few of the examples. The inflation we just went through. That's a way of lowering the standard of living of large numbers of people, which they felt acutely as they went and paid $6 for a dozen eggs or everything else. They know they're suffering. My guess, no chance for Mr. Trump without that inflation. It gave him the victory, and it cost Kamala Harris the loss. But it's not the only thing. Let me give you other examples which an economist stares at with astonishment. The minimum wage at the federal level in the United States right now is $7.25 per hour, a sum of money on which nobody can live. When was the last time it was raised? 2009. That's 15 years ago. In every one of those 15 years, inflation raised the prices here in the United States of food, clothing, shelter, and everything else. Some years it went up a lot. Some years it went up only a little. But it went up. And what did we do to the people to whom we paid the lowest salary, $7.25? We didn't raise it. Republicans didn't raise it. Democrats didn't raise it. You know what that is? That's cruel and unusual punishment given to people whose crime is that they're poorly paid in the first place. What kind of a country does that? A declining empire whose rich and powerful are busy offloading the costs of that decline onto everybody else. Here's another sign. Our real wages have been stagnant for 30 to 40 years. In other words, if you measure, as we do in economics, the average wage in dollars paid to American workers, and you adjust that to the prices they have to pay when they spend their wages, it's been going up somewhere around 0.5% a year. That's called stagnation. That means your wage isn't going anywhere. By the way, in contrast, the average real wages in the People's Republic of China have quadrupled over the same 30 years. If you want to understand why the government in China is secure, why it is powerful, why economic growth there is celebrated, I just gave you the statistic. Their average wage quadrupled. The average wage in the United States went nowhere. That's not even close, friends. And if you didn't know that, since everything I'm telling you is easily verifiable in 1,000 government statistics, then you understand what I mean by denial. We are therefore experiencing in this country an extraordinary deepening of inequality. At the end of World War II, the United States was less unequal than European countries. Today, we are more unequal than every European country. How did that happen? Well, on the one hand, when corporations went to China and took advantage of low wages and a growing market, it made a fortune for those corporations and therefore for the top 10% of Americans who own shares. Just a footnote, the top 10% richest Americans own 80% of the stocks and bonds. They did well. The rest of us, we are experiencing a declining empire, which those at the top don't want you to think about. They're managing it quite well. We cannot. That inequality, together with the inflation, gives you Mr. Trump's victory. And the bitterness and divisiveness that is suffusing this economy. And still, nobody willing to face these realities or to speak about them. Let me conclude by telling you that this is important to understand not only as our past, and not even only as our present, as in the election we just had, but also in our future. This denial, this refusal to face the realities of the economy we have and that is shaping our lives, and even more those of our children, promises us frightening near future. I'm only going to give you 2 examples because I don't want to overstay my welcome with you, but I do want to leave you with useful information to navigate the immediate future. Mr. Trump won the election because he positioned himself with dramatic gestures, the sort favored by Madison Avenue advertisers. And the 2 gestures were, I am the great protector. Mr. Trump understood far better than the Democrats that people feel attacked, undermined, frightened, scared, worried for themselves and their children, as well they should be. They glimpse fearfully where things are going. They want to be protected from it all. So he put himself forward as the great protector. And his 2 images were walls, the image of a protector. He's going to put a steel wall at the southern border to protect us against the invasion of the immigrants. And then he's going to put another wall, a tariff wall, to protect us against the evil Chinese. Very powerful images, very successful. But in terms of economics, total incoherent nonsense. Let me explain, and then I will conclude. We have 10 to 12 million undocumented immigrants. That's according to the Department of Homeland Security. We are a population of 330 million Americans. Do the math. 10 to 12 of the poorest people in the country, those immigrants, are not the explanation for the economic difficulties of this rich country of 330 million people. The very idea of that is ridiculous. An undergraduate who wrote such a thing would be called in by their teacher and told, try to think through what you're saying before you say it. The real economic problems, and they are real, of the United States have to do with what I just spent 20 minutes going over with you. They don't depend on more or less immigrants. On the other hand, if Mr. Trump now deports 5 or 10 of these 10 to 12 million immigrants, which he has threatened to do, there will be consequences. Why? Because undocumented immigrants are the most abused of our working class. An undocumented immigrant who asks for his pay on Friday afternoon and is told by his employer, sorry, I don't have the money, has no recourse. He can't go to the police. He's an undocumented immigrant. He doesn't want to get anywhere near any office of the government. He will not complain. He can't. He's like a slave. And that's how they're treated. The construction industry in this country is a major employer. If it doesn't have undocumented employees, it'll have to pay Americans. And you know what? It'll have to pay them a hell of a lot more than they're paying the terrified, undocumented immigrant. And that will mean the cost of construction will zoom up. And you know what that does? It worsens our inflation. Mr. Trump either can't do it for that reason, or he will produce an inflation that will overnight turn him from savior to demon in the eyes of his own followers. Then there's the second wall, the tariff wall. Let me remind everyone what a tariff is. It's just a tax. It's the name given to a particular kind of tax, namely the tax charged to an American importer when that person brings something produced overseas into the United States to be sold. It means Mr. Trump, a Republican who is against taxes, is proposing an enormous tax increase. And while he keeps saying he's hitting the Chinese with a tariff, it's not the Chinese who pay for tariffs. It's Americans. The American importer will pay much more. And that person will then charge more to the consumer, you and me. And you know what that means? An inflation, which he can't have. Yet he proposes these, counting on the American people to be into denial, not to interrogate any of this, to sit there and have debates as if there's something to debate. The debate is a distraction. It's a way of not dealing with your problem because you're too frightened of letting it be debated, lest it go where it might bite you. And we are run by a community of businessmen and women in charge of our corporations, including our mass media, who are not going to do it. Mr. Trump's economic proposals, whatever else you think of them, are economically incoherent. It's great advertising. I'm protecting you with my walls. It's wonderful. But when it comes now to governing, it's impossible, and it's a bad joke. And the whole world is watching. And while it's watching this bad joke unfold, the gap between the United States and the G7 on one hand, and the People's Republic of China and the BRICS on the other, deepens. The United States' effort to stop, block, undercut China have failed. Been doing it now for 15 years. Started big time under Obama. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so the question is, what? Do you keep doing it? Let me conclude by reminding all of us of the early history of the United States, in which your city, Boston, was such an important player. When the United States' people wanted to become independent of George III, the dominant king of the great British Empire, it ended up in a war, the War of 1774, 5, and 6, our Independence War. And to the surprise of everybody, the British lost. In 1812, they tried again, and they lost again. After that, the British decided, okay, we'll have to work out an arrangement. And the United States arrangement was, you're independent, you can take Latin America. That was the Monroe Doctrine that happened a few years after that. And Britain took the rest. Asia, Africa was theirs. They avoided a war after that for a century. What will the United States do? Continue its denial of what's going on? Threaten, as they have, China with war, despite the fact that China has nuclear weapons and the Russians do too, and they are now allied in good part because of the United States? Or are we going to sit down and work something out? Are we going to tell the American people, honestly, our empire is declining? The next one looks to be Chinese. Or if it isn't Chinese, it's going to be a multinational replacement for the kind of dominance that the Persians or the Dutch or the British or the Americans operated. The world is changing very fundamentally. We are living, as I said a half hour ago, at a time of enormously profound change. And our job as Americans is to stop behaving childishly in this game of thinking that the problems I've barely sketched don't have to be worried about, because we can continue to act as if we were in charge in the way we were in the 1960s and 70s. We aren't. Nothing like that. We are, the war in Ukraine is lost. For those of you who don't keep track, is over, except for signing the documents. Russia won, Ukraine and the West lost. The war in Gaza isolates the United States. Indeed, what historians will say when they look back on this time will be that the United States undertook to isolate and neutralize the dangers after World War II. First in the Soviet Union, then in China, then in the global socialist world, nowadays in what are euphemistically called authoritarian societies. But the end result of the plan to isolate the rest of the world going through these efforts was to isolate the United States itself. We and Israel are standing all alone in that part of the world. And the Europeans, whose world is collapsed, they're economically a basket case. And you know why? What the major reason is that Europe is gone as a player? Because they relied on two things: exporting to China, which the Chinese don't need, and cheap energy from Russia, which they have turned away from. So the energy costs make European production uncompetitive. They have to pay too much for energy, and they can't sell in China the way they once did. They're done. Germany, which used to be the engine of European growth, is now the laggard dragging it down. It really is extraordinary, folks, that what you have thought about and assumed is now over. And it takes courage, but also a sense of realism to say, now we are going to talk honestly about our situation and try to find a livable way forward. The alternative, well, I don't want to spell it out. You can figure it out for yourself. But I hope you will not hold against me that I have told you how this situation really is, rather than comforting you with more denial. But if I have failed, which I understand I may well have, then I have good news for you. If you want to wallow in denial, just turn on the radio and the television, and this evening it will all go away as you get told that the great issues of our time are those carefully excluding everything I have told you. Thank you very much for your attention. I really admire what the community church in Boston stands for, what it always has. I'm proud to have been invited. The list of folks on those cassettes that Dean showed us a few minutes ago puts me in extraordinarily revered company. And with the songs that Rob started us with, I feel very much at home, and I hope this has been of some interest to you.
Richard Wolff, folks, thank you so much. We have one more song from Rod. First, I want to tell you that there will be a link to our PayPal and credit card options on both the chats from the Zoom as well as the YouTube, which Amar informs me has about 600 viewers. it's remarkable. There is also back there an old-fashioned basket that will take your greens as well as your paper checks. Remember those back when? Thank you, Rick Wolff. Denial is no longer a river, only a river in Egypt. Is that the saying? Rod McDonald, thank you again for gracing our space with your elegance and beauty and style. One more song from Rod. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Mr. Wolff, for that very stimulating talk. I was listening to the BBC one night. It comes on after midnight down here in South Florida on the Miami NPR station. And I've been a subscriber to our local newspaper, the Palm Beach Post, which supposedly is a liberal newspaper. And I was listening to All Things Considered almost every day because it just jibed with my schedule as something while I was driving in traffic and stuff. And I began to notice that the Palm Beach Post had 2 or 3 headlines on the front page every day with Trump's name in big letters in them. And I would go through the 14-page news section and not find a single headline with Harris's name in it for days and days at a time. And All Things Considered would start every day with, it's so many days till the election and Donald Trump was campaigning and wherever he was. And then they would quote him, and then they would have his voice say something incendiary. And then they would say, and in related news, Kamala Harris was searching for Latino votes in Pennsylvania, as if she was like some sort of bottom feeder, and they would never use her voice. And I didn't think about it for quite some time until I was listening to the BBC about 4 days before the election day itself, and they broadcast Harris's voice, and I stopped what I was doing, and I thought, I just realized I haven't heard her voice on the radio since the Democratic Convention. I do think that the great deal maker out there made a deal with all the barons of the media. And I don't care what the editors and the reporters thought they were doing. The gist of the electoral coverage was all Trump, everything about Trump, and what Trump said and what was said about him. And so none of the things that you've talked about ever got mentioned. And none of the things that probably even need to be addressed on an immediate level, like the climate situation and gun violence as well, were even mentioned. Though we did get a couple of months of awareness of Haitians eating dogs and Puerto Rican garbage scows. The other thing that kind of struck me, and this I suppose isn't as directly relevant to what you're talking about, was that for 4 years, Republican people who are rabid Trump fans have been taking over the electoral process, all the election jobs all around the country. And yet no one has ever asked if the 12 million fewer votes that Harris got than Biden got 4 years ago might be a case of disappearing vote syndrome. It seems as if everybody just kind of rolls over and goes, oh, well, that's what happened. I don't know any of the answers to these things, but I also feel that what you finished by saying, that we really have to reckon with the rest of the world and not deny our individual place in it has to be changed, kind of leads me to this song, which is somewhat personal, but nonetheless, hopefully will leave us all with something to think about. Hey, is anybody listening? Are you all alone, wherever it is you are? You know, I'm just sitting here thinking, or maybe I'm just wishing on a star. And if there's somebody out there Who can recognize a single word I say? I'd like to ask a simple blessing for all of us while we're all away. Heal the world, heal the world. It's a simple prayer, sing it everywhere. Heal the world, heal the world, heal the world. It's a simple prayer, sing it everywhere. Heal the world. No, we don't need another mountain. We don't need someone to lead us to the light. We just need to learn to live together, and I believe the rest will turn out all right. Heal the world, heal the world. It's a simple prayer, sing it everywhere. Heal the world, heal the world, heal the world. It's a simple prayer, sing it everywhere. Heal the world. Loves all creation, not only me and you. She will rise up if you harm her loved ones. Yes, we're beginning to see that it's true. Heal the world, heal the world. It's a simple prayer, sing it everywhere. Heal the world. Simple prayer, sing it everywhere, heal the world. So hey, is anybody listening? Are you all alone wherever it is you are? You know, I'm just sitting here thinking, or maybe I'm just wishing on a star to heal the world, heal the world. It's a simple prayer, sing it everywhere. Heal the world, heal the world, heal the world. It's a simple prayer, sing it everywhere. Heal the world. Come on, heal the world, heal the world. It's a simple prayer, sing it everywhere. Heal the world. It's a simple prayer, sing it everywhere, heal the world. Thanks so much, and as Mr. Wolff said, and I totally agree, thank you very, very much, Dean, and all you folks for the honor of being here and for inviting me. I also really admire what this church does, and love these reasons to get up in the morning and participate. Thank you so much for having me.
Same here, likewise, right back at you. Love ya. And we hope that you will come and do a concert live in person here pretty soon. I want to tell you about one live in person concert that is coming up. Another people's troubadour named David Rovics will be with us on December 1st. It's our Sunday morning meeting program. On that day, it travels all over Europe and all over the United States. And again, when he's near here, we drop everything and host him. We have, I'm sure, a vibrant Q&A. We're going to ask that you make your questions concise and brief, and make them a question, not a litany or a discourse. And it starts with our own Amar right here.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Professor Wolff. Professor Richard Wolff, I have two questions, actually. The first question is, are the BRICS countries planning to not to do their trade not in the U.S. dollar? And if they do that, what implications would that have for the United States? And the second question is, my second question is, can you comment on the U.S. deficit and also what implications that and its interest has for the U.S.? Thank you.
Sure, I'd love to, but I'm sorry I had a technical issue. Could you just repeat the first part of your question? I know it had two parts.
The first part of my question was, could you comment, are the BRICS countries planning to do to move away from the US dollar? And what would that mean for the US?
Yes. Okay. First part of the question is yes, not only are they planning to, they have already, over the last 20 years, and particularly over the last 5, the countries in the BRICS, and by the way, some others as well, have reduced their reliance on their use of the dollar. You know, the dollar as the global currency was one of the results of World War II. When I pointed out a few minutes ago that all the competitors of the United States were pretty much destroyed in that war, and that we came out kind of top dog in that situation, that's what translated into making the dollar, quote, as good as gold. It was something that every central bank of every one of the 180 countries in the world kept on reserve in their bank in order to show the world that their currency was safe to use, because in any extremity, they could honor their currency by giving you dollars, which the world accepted as, quote unquote, as good as gold. So, for example, 30 years ago, something like 80%, maybe 85% of world central banks held dollars as reserves. They held dollars, literally gold, and maybe a small smattering of euros or Japanese yen. Now the numbers disputed, but it's around 50 to 60%, much, much lower in the form of dollars, because they don't need them so often. What the BRICS have started to do, and they're having huge discussions. One of the major topics at the meeting of the BRICS in Kazan, Russia, 3 weeks ago was all about replacing the dollar. They are now, for example, conducting huge parts of their trading exchange in other currencies. It used to be, up until 3 or 4 years ago, that if country A needed to buy oil, for example, from Saudi Arabia, or country B, they paid for it with dollars. Everybody had to have dollars in their account because much of the world's trade was conducted in dollars. Neither the exporter nor the importer wanted to worry about exchange rates among many different currencies. The dollar was safe. The dollar was secure. The dollar was backed by the United States. All of that is gone. And what you're seeing is the BRICS leading the way, and they're discussing whether to develop a more sophisticated regime using computers to allow countries to trade in their own currencies, or to come up with a new global currency that will compete with the dollar. And my guess is they're going to go with one of those two, and that those decisions, it'll take a little time. The United States is still a very important, big, rich country. But it'll take, I don't know, 5 years, maybe more, to get that in place. But already you should be aware that the dollar is less and less of an international currency, and less secure. And it's not just the dollar. You know, I live in Manhattan. I'm speaking to you from Manhattan, New York City. If I walk along Fifth Avenue or another elegant avenue in New York City at night, most of the apartments are dark because they're not lived in. They are owned by foreigners who park their money inside the United States by buying apartments. 3 times a year, their wealthy children come to New York for a shopping spree, and they live in that apartment. The rest of the time, it's an investment, and it's been a good one. Now you see lights where you didn't before because they're selling their apartments. They don't want to be stuck in the United States. They don't know, for example, with Mr. Trump, whether being a Muslim and owning an apartment is going to become an issue. And maybe you better sell now before that issue is resolved rather than wait and see the price of your apartment collapse because no one is going to buy it from you for this or that reason of hostility from the United States government. All these kinds of questions mean that dealing with the United States, let me give you a couple of other examples. Part of the war against Russia involved the United States using its international position to steal, there's no other word for it, to steal Russia's dollar holdings and gold holdings that Russia had kept in European banks because they need to do business with Europe all the time. Well, that money in the European banks, the American bank, was seized by the United States government. Europeans did that in Europe too. $300 billion, an enormous amount of money. The Russians, by the way, you know what they've done? They've just started seizing US and European assets inside Russia, and there are a lot of those. So there's a whole, but you see, if you were the dominant player, US, then all of these developments damage your situation. No matter how fast it goes, it's less for the US economy, less for the US dollar. That's what's going on. As to the debt, absolutely, the decline of the American empire is shown by the fact that just like you and I in our personal lives, we would like to be able to earn enough money to buy the things we need. End of story. We don't want to be in the position of borrowing. Because if, for example, I can't afford to buy an automobile, I have to borrow the money. And in case you haven't paid attention, when you borrow money to buy a car, the car ends up costing you more than the price you paid because you have to pay interest on the loan with which you bought the car. So if the more people are indebted, the more everything costs them. When you hear about an inflation, you may think, oh, it's only about the price of a dozen eggs or a quart of milk or a loaf of bread. It is all those things, but it's also the level of debt that adds to everybody an interest cost. You see that at the end of the month when you get your credit card bill. There you begin to see you're going to have to pay a lot of money that in the end is about the eggs you bought, but you paid a certain amount at that time, and then you have to pay interest on what you borrowed to buy those eggs. Debt is a sign that an economy is having trouble, okay? The debt of the United States now is at an all-time high. That's the government debt. But you can also look at corporate debt. The debt of corporations is also at an all-time high. And the debt of individual households is just below the all-time high and about to surpass it probably next year. So we are a country, all of whose debts, government debt, private business debt, and private household debt, are all at record highs. That's an alarm bell. To give you an idea of one of the meanings of it, this coming year, we will all be paying taxes to go to the government, and it will cost the government something on the order of between $600 and $800 billion of our tax money that doesn't pay for schools or hospitals or roads or anything we want. It's just interest on all the debt the government has assumed. And who gets it? Well, of course, the people who lend to the government. And if you've never had a visit from a government official negotiating with you about how much you're going to lend to the government, then you already know that where that interest goes is not to you. It's going to corporations and the rich who have the money that they lend to the government. In order to let me drive it home to you about the bizarreness, the American government is the most indebted government on this planet. We are #1 debtor country. And the two countries that have lent to us the most are Japan and the People's Republic of China. They are the two largest creditors for the United States, who is the largest debtor. Another alarm bag ought to go off. Whoa. But now let me enjoy with you one of the implications that the Chinese People's Republic of China is a major creditor. They own about, get ready, 700, give or take, $700 billion worth of the debt of the United States. The United States government has to raise taxes to collect the money to pay to China every year interest on the debt. When you borrow from China, you have to pay interest, like any borrower, from the creditor, which means you and I are paying our taxes, part of which the government of the United States collects and sends to the People's Republic of China, who can do whatever they want with billions and billions of our tax money. That's how this is being handled. And if you didn't know that, that's more denial, friends. That's more of what's going on that you are not told. By the way, is this a secret? No, no, no. Take me 5 minutes. I mean, I'm an economist, but I could show you, take you 5 minutes to go to that government website where they'll tell you who is lending to the United States government, how much do we owe each country, how much interest flows there each year, all public information. But like everything else, something that neither Kamala Harris nor Donald Trump had any interest in discussing. They could discuss lots of other issues, it turns out, just not those that might reveal what it means to be a declining empire.
Thank you, Rick. Here's Tim.
Thank you for a very stimulating talk. Okay. You've talked a lot about denial and delusion, but we should not forget that the most delusional person in the United States is Donald Trump. And he literally believes that when he says something, it is true. And I'm quite convinced that he's going to go through with those tariffs and with his mass deportation. When the massive inflation that you've predicted, I think very correctly, happens, he's going to need a scapegoat. He won't be able to blame the migrants. They've been rounded up. So there's really two broad choices. One is to go abroad and start a war, say, with the Chinese, because they're to blame. And the other is to say the Democrats or the liberals or anything, something like that, domestically, and round them up and use those internment camps for other purposes. Which do you think it's going to be?
Yes. Look, I'm with you on the point, as I tried to make it, that his economics is incoherent. And I understand what you're saying on the premise that he goes ahead with it. But let me respond by first quarreling with your premise. I'm not so sure he'll go ahead with it because it's risky for him. It's risky to have another inflation. And yeah, he'll try to blame it on this one or that one. But as Kamala Harris learned, she could blame it in every which way that she did. The bottom line was poll after poll, including the exit polls during the election indicate that the old remark, I believe, made years ago about what decides an election, the remark, "It's the economy, stupid." I don't remember who was supposed to have said so. But the economic dilemma of people was that between the time Biden was elected and this election, prices had gone up dramatically, and nobody had done anything to bring them back. All that Biden's and the Federal Reserve were able to do was to bring the rate of growth down to 2 to 3%. And even that is a very shaky kind of business. So people were stuck with a constant reminder of the inflation. It helped Mr. Trump immeasurably. I think his advisors are going to say to him, hey, yeah, it might be awkward for you to back down on the immigrants. It might be awkward for you to back down on the Chinese tariffs, but it's going to be mighty awkward for you when you have an inflation to deal with. Do you really want to go down that path? And so that's what they're going to do. They're going to weigh the costs and benefits of doing what they promised versus looking like flip-floppers versus facing an inflation and knowing that the Democrats will be all over them, blaming them for it. And you're right, they won't have the immigrants to blame, and they won't have the Chinese. Chinese don't raise prices. It'll be very hard to do that, even with this country's level of economic literacy being what it is. They would have to have a war or something distracting, immensely distracting. So let me add to your anxieties what it might be, which is really to discover a vast, horrible conspiracy here in America. One having nothing to do with economics, where they can make an issue out of it and keep the headlines devoted to that issue and to all they're doing to deal with that issue. In other words, they'll need, for example, what Hitler had. Pick out Jews or pick out gypsies or find some part of the population big enough so you have a lot of hoopla that you can target, claim that they are in some mysterious way responsible for the inflation. That doesn't have to be all that well worked out. Look at what Americans accept as economic discourse in this country. But then make all the excitement about what you're doing. You're rounding them up. You're putting them in jail. Lord knows, during World War II, that was done to the Japanese Americans on the West Coast. So we have practice in this country at doing that sort of thing. Everybody will forget the apologies given to the Japanese community after the war because there was no basis for it, whatever. Anyway, and all of that can be done this time. And my guess is those are the calculations that they're going to likely make. And I'm, again, not to quarrel with you. I think your analysis was good. I just think it's a little bit more dicey that I know some of the people advising him, and they will advise him, don't do that nonsense with the tariffs. Don't do that nonsense with the immigrants. He's probably not going to listen and go ahead with deporting immigrants, but he will probably listen with the Chinese. Remember that the worst tariffs on China were actually put by Mr. Biden. Give you an example. Starting around 10 years ago, the whole world, every automobile maker in the world, almost without exception, undertook to work on producing electric cars and vehicles. Elon Musk became the richest person in the world because he did it first. But everybody's done it ever since. And they're all trying to now do what Musk did, only produce a better car at a lower price. And in the competition to do that, one company and one country came out on top. And as should surprise nobody, that country is China. And the company, which Americans don't know about yet, but they will, is called the BYD, three initials. B is in boy, Y is in yellow, D is in dog. The BYD Corporation makes the best electric car and truck at the lowest price. Nobody can compete with them on either the quality or the price. You will not see such a car, a BYD, on the roads here in the United States. But if you were to take a trip today to Europe, you'd see them all over the roads in Europe. Why? Because Europe had a tariff until recently of 20-something percent. Now it's 30-something percent. But Mr. Biden raised it from 20-something percent here to 100%. So, for example, it means if you could buy a BYD car from China for $30,000, you would have to pay here in the United States $30,000 to go to the Chinese manufacturer BYD, plus another $30,000, 100%, to Uncle Sam in a tariff. So it would cost you $60,000. So you're not going to do it. All of your competitors around the world buying electric cars and trucks are buying BYD cheap, but you can't get it because of your government. So you're going to have to pay Ford or General Motors or Tesla 30, 40, 50,000, much more, because they can get away with charging it. They don't have to worry about the competition from BYD. You know what that's going to do? Hurt American competitiveness, hurt American jobs. You won't hear about that. You'll just hear about, I'm hitting China with tariffs. That's what I mean. It's an incoherent, nonsensical program. And my guess is he's going to hear a lot from his advisors telling him, be very careful. This could come back and bite you in the rear end politically in a way you do not want to have.
We have one more question. Time is short, from Mike Heichman online. Hi, Mike. Join us.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Wolff. In addition to denial, there's also the theme of violence, led by Kamala, the lethal commander-in-chief. In your very thorough report on economics, you didn't mention climate. What is the effect of global climate chaos on the economy? Never mind the decline of empire. Are we headed towards economic and social collapse?
I don't know about collapse, but I do know that the climate crisis is a real factor impacting the US economy in so many ways that it would take a politician who was really honest to think through, with advisors, of course, and then present to the people some kind of comprehensive way of dealing with that. Trump is never going to do that. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris didn't do it either. But I'm going to give you now some examples. One of the major reasons large numbers of very poor people want to immigrate into the United States is because where they live has been impacted by climate change, so they can't make a living there. They can't grow crops, they can't grow animals, they can't maintain a certain industry, they can't maintain trade. The United States' pollution, or its contribution, not only the United States, but the United States, being a rich, big, powerful country, contributes in many ways to global movements of currents and temperature changes and so on. And those are, for example, a major factor in the immigration crisis we have. Likewise, the changing temperatures and currents around the world are affecting global trade in all kinds of ways that cost the United States. And so a comprehensive program on climate could in fact soften, ameliorate, modify, or in some cases solve other kinds of problems you don't connect in your mind right away to climate. And then, of course, the question of what it's doing to human health, to food production, and all the rest that we already know a good bit about ever since, Rachel Carson wrote her book umpteen years ago, letting us know about this. So yes, the climate is so important because it's not just a direct threat to us in the form of the wildfires and the droughts and all the other things, the hurricanes that we can see and that are dramatic. But just as important are these indirect effects on all of us. Europe is becoming, in the summertime, in large parts of it, almost uninhabitable. It gets so hot. They can't grow wine in areas that used to be wine producers. Or what are those people going to do? Where are they going to go? How are the economies going to cope with all of this? In order for this to be handled, of course, you need international cooperation, and you need the cooperating countries to be able to make policy. We don't have that. But the problem there is not Kamala Harris and Trump. The problem there is a capitalist system. If we allow the decision about where we locate production, what goods we produce, what technologies we use, to be made by a tiny group of people, the employer class. U.S. Census tells us that 3% of Americans are employers. See, the other 97% are employees or their families. Well, we're allowing 3% of the people to make the decisions, what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, etc. And they tell us honestly, we do it to maximize profit, because that's what people like me teach them in business school. You are there to maximize profit. Okay, that's what they're doing. You don't want them to do that. You want them to have as a priority, which I agree with, maintaining the climate. Okay, but then what do you do if that which is profitable is bad for the climate? Which objective prevails? In capitalism, the answer is profit. Then you got to question the system and look at how likely that is in a country like ours, which denies that there is another system, which denies that there's a conversation to be had where we weigh the pros and cons of capitalism with the pros and cons of the alternatives that are there. You know what is teaching that lesson slowly and painfully? China. The people of the world, the majority of the people of the world live in countries that are poor. And their number one objective of those countries is to stop being poor, to have enough to live, to raise their families, to educate their children. That's what they want. So they want to see economic growth. What they see now is that in China, the growth that they've achieved is the most spectacular growth story in world history. So they are looking at that system, which the Chinese call socialism with Chinese characteristics. That's the official name. Okay, should we discuss the pros and cons of these different systems? Of course we should. Of course that should be on the agenda. Of course we should have voting. Which one do we want to try? Well, we don't do that. We exclude all of that, and we focus only on other issues that are important, but they're not any more important than those that we are excluding, and we are going to die from this exclusion one way or another until people realize they can't continue to deny the climate issues, direct and indirect, but all of these other issues as well.
Okay. Professor Richard Wolff, thank you so much.
My pleasure and my congratulations to all of you for maintaining a very important and positive institution.
We try to keep the flame alive. And thank you all for being here. Join us for lunch. Luis Guzman has prepared a delicious repast for us, after which we will have a meeting in a half an hour. So we got to chow down a little bit quickly. Rod McDonald, if you're still with us, thank you so much. And Richard Wolff, again, we conclude, we declare the official morning meeting over, and we repair to the luncheon, after which we will have a congregational meeting. No, right here.